Thank you very much for coming tonight. We're talking about biophilia and wellness and how design can help people feel better from houses to residential and other commercial spaces. We got three fantastic speakers tonight. I'll start a brief introduction with Emma Webb. She's an interior designer and she's got over 25 years of career has built an extensive portfolio, a distinctive project in Ireland internationally. Emma's qualifications include a Bachelor of Arts in Psychology, Well-Building Standard Professional Accreditation, Biophilic Design, Healthier Materials and Sustainable Building Certificates. Also with us tonight is Lisa Smith, Head of Interiors at Ready Architecture and Urbanism. Lisa is the head of interiors at Ready Architecture. She graduated in 1996 and since then has worked as interior project architect in Ireland and internationally on various projects, including office, retail, hospitality, healthcare, student amenity accommodation, and residential fit out. Very busy lady. She has many award-winning projects for the practice, and most notably, she designed the modern agile office working environments for Deloitte, Google, Savills, and progressive healthcare facilities for Virtue Ireland and the Willis Care Group. Last but not least, we have here with us tonight Sarah Tilbury. She's the concept designer at Interface. Sarah has worked as a concept designer for Interface for 8 years, assisting and guiding clients to realize their idea flooring designs. Before that, Sarah worked in various design practices and gained experience and a strong passion for innovative and sustainable design. This included a year working for BREEAM, assisting with developing assessment methods and training future assessors. She also worked as a workplace consultant for Foster and Partners, producing floor plate and brief analysis, focusing on the interiors of commercial spaces. So without further ado, please welcome our first speaker, Emma Webb. Thank you very much. Good. So I pointed. Oh. Okay. So my name's Emma Webb. Working as an interior designer for around. Oh yes, I'll be needing this obviously. So I've been working as an interior designer for about for a very long time. I've worked in Ireland and abroad, and I've come to the conclusion at this stage that one of the most challenging things that we as designers and architects face is how to design well environments. And these are buildings that not only are adaptive or sustainable or inclusive, but also that support a healthy lifestyle and healthy decision making. So according to the WHO, 70% of our health and, as you can say, I don't know if you can see in this, and longevity is determined by our health behaviors and by our environment. So we know that we spend 90% of our time indoors. Do you know how many years we spend in our homes? So the average age of the lifespan in Ireland is 82 years. We spend 90% of our time indoors. That's 74 years indoors, of which 2/3 of that time is spent in a residential setting. That's 49 years in our homes or in somebody else's home, and 24 years in our bedrooms. So what's interesting about this is that spending half our lives in our homes, this is probably the environment that will have most impact on our health and well-being, yet it's the most underrated and under-researched design environment. So we have to rely on research on commercial or hospitality or care interiors and apply it when designing homes. So I'm going to focus on residential design today, and Lisa's going to talk about commercial and care, I think, isn't it? So, right. Okay, so biophilic design. What is it? It is an evidence-based approach that fuses design with natural elements in order to create interiors that impact positively on our health and well-being. It is not new. It's been around for donkeys. It's written about in the Bible. The book of Leviticus actually talks about how to avoid leprosy by designing homes in such a way. The Egyptians and the Romans actually recognized the value of natural sunlight and clean water, and they actually brought plants into their homes. The Knights of Malta designed their beds in their hospitals with a view.
a view of greenery. And who else did stuff? Oh, Florence Nightingale. She very famously said, don't build good hospitals, build good homes. And she identified that there were 5 really important things we should incorporate into home design: fresh air, sunlight, drainage, cleanliness, and I'm sure there's a 5th, but it's gone out of my head right now. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So, biophilic design, right. Okay, so Terrapin Bright Green developed this sort of framework for how we can incorporate biophilic design principles into any project. It was the 14 patterns of biophilic design, which is now 15, because they added number 15 in the last year. And basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to incorporate as many of these patterns as possible into an interior, but in a natural way. Like, it's not good enough to throw a few potted plants in a corner and call it biophilic design. We need to look at engaging all of the senses, and that's how biophilic design works. I mean, some of the strongest physiological responses we have are to non-rhythmic stimuli, which is pattern number 1, 2, 3. So like a breeze that's unexpected or a sound that's unexpected, we respond really, really strongly to that, because that's what we experience in nature. It's unexpected, it's not routine, it's not rigorous. So the patterns come in 3 categories. So the first category is nature in the space, and this is really about, bringing nature indoors, bringing all the senses that we would engage if we were in the outdoors, using natural materials or bringing in water, bringing in plants. As I said, using breeze, airflow, scents, sounds, and so on. Natural analogues are literally about copying the patterns and forms and scales of what we might see in nature. But we don't need to do this literally. We want to kind of have our own interpretations. So if you think of Art Nouveau, if you think of Victor Horta's hotels and the metros in Paris, I mean, that was pure biomorphic design. It's real biophilic. Or Gaudi in Barcelona, Casa Mila, the balconies. I mean, this is what I mean. It's been around for a long time. It's just what's happening today is that we have so much research behind it, and it's accessible to everyone, that it's become a much more, I suppose, recognized way or approach of design. And then the third category is nature of the space. And this is about designing our spaces kind of in the way that we would get around spaces outdoors. It helps wayfinding. There's the Savannah principle, which is this idea that we are more comfortable when we have a view over a distance. And ideally, when you're incorporating this into a design, if you can have a view that's over 30 meters is optimum. Over 6 meters is fine. If you can't create a view in an interior, you might use artwork. But give distance is the idea. It also, prospect is another one of these, refuge is another one of these patterns, which again is part of the Savannah sort of principle, that we're more comfortable like in a cave or, in a place where our back is protected and we can kind of see what's going on around. We feel safe. So, right, let's go on to the next one. Okay, so biophilic design crops up in the well building standard in a number of places, primarily in the mind concept, but also in air, light, fixtures, materials, sound. Where else we got down here? I don't know if you can see all of these. That's a shame. There's a list of all of the ways we can kind of tie them in, but I might see them better on the video later on. But the well building standard, if you're not familiar with it, was launched in 2014. It's a set of guidelines to build buildings and interiors that focus on supporting the wellness, mental health, and emotional health of the inhabitants of the spaces. And there's a list that's about, there's 2 types of action you have to take. There are things called preconditions, and these are things you must do. And then there are optimizations, which are a list of choices, which you get points for. And to get certification in any project, you have to achieve a certain amount of points. And this is where biophilia comes in. Biophilia is actually a precondition. So under the mind concept and well building, you have to use biophilic design. So that is a well, you've no choice, basically. Right. This might be quite hard to hear, so I'll try and talk you through it. Oh, we're not moving. Oh, grand. Okay. Oh, design tools. So, as well as biophilic design and as well as using the well building standard, there are other design tools we can use when we're trying to design supportive spaces. One is the Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi, which kind of values imperfection and beauty and harmony and tranquility. And it kind of encourages you to look at things as they are and to celebrate that. And then you got hygge, the Danish art coziness. You kind of know hygge when you're in it. It's all about cozy, being togetherness and warmth and comfort. Then we've got nudge or neuroarchitecture. So this is about how the environment can impact on our decision making, and good design, how it can help making the better decision at the time. And active design, movement. And again, these are all backed by well principles. So trying to create opportunities for movement throughout the day or in your spaces. So this is a live project. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, which I was just going to highlight the considerations I would have when I'm taking all those design tools into place. So I have to read it myself. So let's say active and movement and access. So there's a corridor down the outside, and it's got a bike room and a boot room and a utility. This is about encouraging people to get out to use their bike rather than the car to go to work. You want to, this is also a bit of nudge design. If you put the bikes somewhere easy to access, they don't want to lug them through the garden, through the house, down the stairs, across the road. You're not going to use your bike if it's difficult. But if your bike's easy to get at, you can get out the door faster. So this is sort of the theory behind nudges: make things easier to make the right decision. We've got light windows on 3 sides. So we're trying to follow the light of the sun and how it changes during the day. Sunlight's very important for circadian rhythms. If you don't, I'm sure most people know what they are, but just to maybe recap on them. Circadian rhythms are our natural 24-hour body clock. They trigger, or sunlight, light, dark and light triggers different responses in our body. So it might tell us that we're hungry or we're tired or it's time to wake up. We all know that blue light inhibits melatonin, which is our kind of going to sleep hormone. So you want to avoid that in the evenings. And so circadian lighting, or natural light, is really good for resetting our circadian rhythms. So 10 minutes of sunlight first thing in the morning is a great resetter. So one of the considerations I would have is trying to get eastern light, like morning light, into an area that you might have somebody making a cup of coffee or the school lunches or something in the morning, to get their dose without having to go out or, make an effort to go and do it. Wellness kitchen. So a social connection. This is kind of huge in terms of our mental health. Studies have shown, or dementia studies have shown, that a lack of a social connectedness can be one of the risk factors for developing dementia at an early age. They've seen the changes in the brain from age 50, although dementia doesn't kick in till around your 80s. So we need to be designing spaces in homes that families and friends can have group activities and kind of quiet activities. But we need to create a social hub, basically. Also, other studies have shown that families who dine together are more likely to eat more nourishing meals. The kids are less likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. They are more bonded as a family. And people who suffer from mental health issues do better if they have the support of family and friends. So, creating an island is very simple, but actually it is the center of the home. Everybody congregates around an island and talks. Then we have light. Okay, I mentioned that, and biophilic design. Okay, right, you're probably not going to see this. So part of biophilic design is about creating connection to the place that you're building in. So that same project that I just showed you is concept design for a project we're working on in Dalkey. And it's right beside Dalkey Quarry. So I went up and I took photographs. And from that, I devised a material and colour palette based on what we saw around. That gives us a real connection to what's inside and outside if what we're looking out at is sort of similar to what we're looking in at. And so we want to... since most of our building materials are kind of straight and it's really expensive to do curved lines or shapes, we need to use our surfaces. We need to put patterns and textures in any way we can, really, on surfaces to give a bit of more complexity to our interiors. The brain gets bored. It doesn't like flat walls. So we need to stimulate it with texture and shadow and shape. And as the sun moves around, then we create much more interesting interiors. Also, to bring in the curves, we could use more organic and rounded furniture. Interesting research has shown that the brain it kind of exhibits more activity when it's surrounded by curved furniture and spaces rather than boxy furniture. Materials, so we can fake it. So we don't have to use real marble or real timber. Kind of is one of those cross-line ones. But the brain knows it's fake, but it's still, you still have a response physiologically to natural materials. It's just not as strong as the real thing, but it's generally more practical. So for example, a porcelain tile might be a better solution in Ireland than a marble, you know, accessible and easier to maintain. Now, what else we got here? Oh, and plants, right. So obviously, everybody always thinks biophilic design and they just go to plants straight away. It is a good thing to have, and NASA says we should have 1 per meter. Well, thing suggests 1% of the square footage of, or square meterage. Sorry, I'm showing my age of the space. This is a bathroom that I did for clients who were lousy in the mornings, couldn't get out of bed. So it's really energizing. I use contrasting colors, but I also used fractals. So fractals on the wallpaper. Fractals are natural patterns that replicate at larger sizes, different sizes in nature. And studies have shown that we respond, or we get, our concentration gets boosted, our focus gets boosted in fractals. And so, oh yeah, if you were going to do maybe something completely opposite, you know, if you wanted a more restorative color scheme, or a restorative space, you would use not contrasting colors, but colors in the same complementary kind of families next to each other. And the reason they're more calming is they're kind of easier to experience. There's less of a transition between each color. But be careful, they can be bland. Kind of a monochromatic color scheme can be quite bland, so you definitely need texture. This is another project, and this was near the sea, and yet in the case of the lower ground floor and kitchen and living spaces were down, a Victorian villa, you know, that type of style. It was really kind of darkish, there was no views, so I flipped it. I brought the kitchen upstairs and all the living space, and now we benefited from, you know, dual aspect sun and views, obviously, of the sea. So since we beside the sea, went to the beach, got all the pebbles, got some driftwood, and we got the units, the wall units are made up in this kind of a textured timber, the sliding doors, which is beautiful, the colour of driftwood, and the stone, the marble layers, quartzite around the island was to match the colours we saw around. And then all of the furniture was really organic and soft and rounded, and the colours are really muted and kind of watery. One of the things that we also did here is, I don't know if you can see it, but in the kitchen we hid everything, so hiding clutter. There's an enormous amount of clutter studies that's shown that, you know, people who live in cluttered spaces from the start of the day to the end of the day, actually their mood or their sense of happiness, they call it, can actually go down. Women who, there was a study in UCLA in 2010, and they looked at women living in cluttered homes and discovered that their levels of cortisol, or their patterns cortisol, were similar to people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. But on another interesting note, you are 77% more likely to be overweight if you live in a cluttered home, and you're twice as likely to reach for a chocolate bar than an apple. And that is it. That's me done. So thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, be happy to talk to you.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm going to touch on how that gets applied to large commercial spaces, so a little bit different from kind of what Emma's gone through in her residential projects. So I'm going to go through it in terms of 2 examples. Obviously, as we've said before, I have healthcare, education, residential, and workplace experience, but today I'm just going to go through workplace and education. So if you want to click forward there. Okay, cool. So one project I'm going to look at for you is biophilic design. I'm going to look at Glencar, which is on Marion Road, opposite the RDS. I don't know if anybody's seen the scaffold there lately. So that is a 7,000 square metre, 6-storey office development by the Clean Group. So I'm going to talk about that in terms of biophilic design, and then secondly I'm going to talk about well design in education. So then I'm going to look at a much larger project, 3 times that size, which is for UCD James Joyce Library, which is a 6-storey, 23,000 square metre project. So if you want to just jump on to the next. So in terms of biophilic design strategies, there's a number we looked at for the Glencar project. The project looked at a number of the attributes and pillars of biophilic design, so environmental features, natural shapes and forms, natural patterns and processes, light and space, place-based relationships, and evolved human-nature relationships. So I'm just going to go to the next slide and show you an image of the project, if you can see. So this is the development here. The project was inspired by Glencar Waterfall, hence the name of the building. And the internal space, which is a 2-story atrium, is a metal waterfall, which we designed using anodized aluminium rods, which we twisted into random patterns to create something that looked like a waterfall. Externally to the building, we also had a piece of sculpture, which was designed by Rachel Joint, an Irish sculptress. It's a sycamore seed, and it's a hyper-realistic, large size. It's probably 10-foot high bronze sculpture sitting in a water feature of a sycamore seed, which links all the way to the back of the building, which has a sycamore tree. So it's that kind of principle of using art, culture, design to link biophilic concepts into large buildings. So the public and the people using the building can enjoy the sculpture and see the atrium from the public path. Next to look at is probably the concept of the waterfall that we developed. So we looked at the obvious, most famous buildings inspired by a waterfall, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. And we looked at how the kind of natural cascades of water hit rocks, how the rocks are softened by the falling of the water over time, and how it creates these natural patterns. We also looked at a poem by W.B. Yeats, which was The Stolen Child, which writes about a waterfall, and we included engraving throughout the building in the tiles so that there's a sense of surprise and mystery. When you walk through the building, you see these little quotes from that poem, and that kind of brings in a biophilic aspect of evolved human nature, arts and culture, curiosity and poetry. This image here, I don't know if you can see it, is actually the technical drawings for these atrium fins. So they go up, as I said, 2-story atrium. They sit in front of the glass and they create shadow play on the atrium space when the natural daylight and the artificial daylight hits them down onto the floor and into the walkways of the atrium above. We intentionally developed the fin so that there is no consistent pattern. The pattern for the set out of the fins is completely random. So again, we're just trying to do that biomimicry, emulating nature and connecting to the environment. Another element of that kind of concept we brought in, it was the staircase. I don't know if you can see it there. So the fire part K and the part M DAC staircase both have this concept of random vertical balustrade uprights. So you can kind of see it there in the image. Again, there's no pattern to set out of the vertical uprights. For building regs, you obviously have to have them at a certain distance apart for safety. But again, there's absolutely no pattern to them. So they emulate nature and they're made in a bronze finish. We also introduced a light box with handcrafted fluted glass to the WC lobby, which is another element of surprise and bringing in the waterfall concept. And then here's our material palette. So again, using natural shapes and form, natural materials, bronze, indigenous materials. So we used Connemara stone, which we selected very specific cuts of the stone. And in that, there's a lot of imperfection. So I know, as Emma said, you can go for the kind of computer patterned stone, but what you'll find is it doesn't have the same imperfections that you get from the natural thing. We used wood finishes like dark stained ash. We used handcrafted joinery, handcrafted fluted glass. So it's a very naturally pigmented colour scheme with a variety of textures in it as well. And then this, if you can see, that's the reception, and they're the fins. So you can see the fins in that image. I know it's quite washed out, but they're twisting. The anodized aluminium catches light in a very dynamic way. So they're twisting and catching the light and shining shadows all across that atrium space. And then this is kind of some of the environmental features. We used a lot of planting outside. We spoke about the sycamore tree, but we also had a large roof terrace above the third floor, which has wild planting and indigenous planting, which encourages, ecosystems and so on. And then that's Glencar. The next project I'm going to talk about is actually in terms of well design. So 3 times the scale of that. We are still working on, it's going to be finished in August, a project for UCD, it's James Joyce Library. I don't know, maybe some of you have been in there. But it was a very interesting project for us because we interfaced with over 800 students with surveys to find out what students need today in terms of a study environment. So in terms of the well principles that we looked at for that project would be air, water, nourishment, light, movement, thermal comfort, sound, materials, mind, and community. They're the kind of 10 pillars of well. Well is becoming extremely popular. As Emma said, it started in 2014. The growth of kind of well-certified buildings is exponential. We now have about 100 of the 500 Fortune-listed companies are all well-accredited, going for well-accredited buildings. So one of the first things we looked at for UCD was the idea of community. So as I said, we did an occupant survey of over 800 students, which we did through Typeform. We then had to review and analyse that data. We also went to visit other university libraries with students. What we found is people have very different needs, depending if they're undergrads, postgrads, PhD, master students. They all had quite different wants and needs. If they were doing collaborative study, if they're doing individual study, what period of time it is at the year. Is it like exam time or not, or is it more kind of project work? So our challenge was to design a pilot floor for this building, taking on board all of those different things. So one of the things as well that cropped up in our survey was neurodiversity. So that kind of falls under the mind category of wellness. Not everybody is the same. We're all very different. Some people are very sensitive to sensory stimuli and need more kind of tactile, quieter, controllable spaces. So when I say controllable in terms of daylight and controllable in terms of artificial lighting and controllable in terms of sound, and also kind of a smaller space. Some people are very kind of stressed out by large open spaces. So it's kind of the stress management of designing the right kind of spaces that are restorative for those people and allow them to do their study. Another element of kind of community design that we look at is kind of gender inclusive. So when we look at washrooms and signage, we've developed concepts in terms of gender inclusive washrooms, ones that are shared, ones that have self-care areas, ones that have privacy, and ones that feel safe to use. So on the bottom, kind of left-hand side, I don't know if you can see it, if you move on another one. There we go. The bottom left-hand side, you can kind of see a diagram of how you can design gender inclusive washrooms. So the other thing to say is out of our 800-person survey, we developed 5 study modes because we obviously can't accommodate 800 different study modes. So we narrowed down into groups of kind of 5 types that would suit students. And then we applied those 5 types across the floor plate. These 5 types range from kind of relaxed, noisier, collaborative, group study spaces, which we positioned around the central core where the main circulation happens. And then from there, we get into more and more acoustically sensitive and individual study modes. So study mode 4 is like an open study desk. Study mode 3 is a semi-focused study desk. And study mode 2 would be more focused. And then study mode 1 is completely silent. You go there because you do not want to be disturbed and you have very intense kind of focused study to do. So the other thing in terms of, mind and community, we worked with an OT on the neurodiversity spaces. And we worked with the OT for about 3 months. And they had some really good ideas on how we could cater for people with those kind of needs. And we had a lot of feedback from students saying they don't use the library because it makes them feel uncomfortable. We had students saying, they would feel singled out if there was one zone for neurodiversity. So what we did was we peppered the floors with these zones so they weren't segregated or identified as different. In those spaces, we include a lot more tactile surfaces, and we had different types of furniture, like rocking chairs, different types of flooring, different types of multi-way lighting, color change lighting. So this, I don't know if you can see, is a plan of that space and how we designed the neurodiversity area. And then this slide goes into sound mapping. Sound is an important consideration on 2 levels. One is sound separation and one is reverb and sound quality. So we deal with both. We deal with sound separation in terms of those study mode 1s being in an acoustically compartmentalized space. And then we deal with reverb and sound quality with sound absorbing materials. So in this project, it's largely open plan, so there wasn't a lot of wall surface to add acoustic materials. But what we did have was columns everywhere. So we cladded every single column with a Class A absorber, which also had dowelling on the top to increase our acoustic absorption area across the space. We also used special flooring which had acoustic matting underneath. And we also introduced crosstalk attenuators to all surfaces going through rooms that were acoustically separated. And then this is just an image of the columns, if you can see, which are these dowel-clad columns with an acoustic foam behind. You can also see the waffle ceilings, which are the original kind of 1970s brutalist architecture style, which we retained intentionally because they assist with acoustics in terms of their shape and form. And they also assist with thermal comfort because concrete is a great absorber of heat. So it kind of absorbs the heat and also helps cool. And then in this image as well, you can also see the kind of curved seating and lighting arrangements that we had. And then light was a huge consideration in this project. So we know that with our own circadian rhythms that we require periods of light and dark. So we tried to develop a multi-way artificial lighting because it's quite a deep floor plate. So we had the waffle lights in the ceiling. We had dimmable task lights on the desks. We have spotlights on the perimeter cores. We had suspended lighting over particular desks with kind of linen shades. And then we had art wall lighting as well. So we had like 5, 6 different types of lighting, all creating this much more dynamic effect. And a lot of the lighting on the desks is very controllable, so people can kind of adjust to their own needs if they feel they've had kind of too much light. And then the other thing is we used pretty much all 3000 Kelvin. So I don't know if people are familiar with lighting Kelvin rates. So you can go from 3000 to 7000 Kelvin. 3000 is a lovely warm, kind of heading towards incandescent light. It's very conducive for positive social interaction with people. So that was the lighting Kelvin we chose to use. We also were very particular on the lightings for the waffle ceiling. We got a bespoke light made, so it lights up and it lights down. It has this particular anti-glare diffuser on it, so nobody while they're studying is getting direct glare on what they're doing on their screen or their paperwork. And then this image shows you the quantity of different light types we have. So it's a scheduling nightmare. And then this next slide just shows you kind of in the space, the different lighting setup. And then movement. Movement, you can look at kind of things like ergonomic workstations, sit-stand desks, ergonomic chairs. In this project, we have, I think, 6 types of chairs, including a task chair. People are different gaits, sizes, heights, weights. Not every chair suits everyone. We narrowed it down to 6 that suits lots of different types. We use a human scale chair for the task chair. It's a self-adjusting ergonomic chair with lumbar support. All of these different chairs suit different types of people, but they also suit different lengths of study. So sometimes people study for an hour, and sometimes people could be in there for 12 hours. So different needs for different times of the year and for different types of people. Next slide is all the different kind of furniture styles we picked. So we had a lot of joinery made. I would say about 60% of the furniture is joinery. The rest is very carefully selected, again, to be ergonomic, but also to have natural shapes and forms. Also to look quite handcrafted. So we didn't like the idea of things looking factory produced and not having a connection to the human touch and hand in terms of their creation. So we did look for furniture that looked more handcrafted and artisan in feel. The next slide is our material palette. So again, like before with the Glencar project, we used a lot of natural kind of colour palettes, burnt sienna, umber, natural kind of concrete finish, natural timber finishes, very particular on the grain of the wood and the tactile kind of surfaces of the fabrics that for us they needed to look quite hand woven. And that can be an issue when you're designing for student environments, because generally in terms of facility management, the standard issue is leatherettes and plastics, but we really aimed towards finding fabrics that were maintainable yet tactile. Air quality is another thing under well design. So in this particular building, we have natural ventilation everywhere. That was part of the original 1970s building design. We made sure we didn't block it. That was the one thing we had to do. We didn't put cellular spaces blocking that natural ventilation. All the windows are accessible and able to open by individuals without assistance. Oxygen and planting. So we had a huge amount of, I know, like we said before, everybody thinks about biophilia and planting, but we also have to think of it in terms of air quality. So plants supply a lot of oxygen to the environment internally. Then in terms of air quality, again, we looked at carpet tiles and finishes that would absorb microparticles. So there's different ranges of carpet tiles that can absorb microparticles, such as pollen, hair, skin, cells, clothing, dirt. Not nice things to think about, but there are a lot of them, particularly in a space like this, which seats kind of, this floor alone seats 350 people. So it's, what extra can you do to improve the air quality in the space? So that's me. I hope that covered a lot of points. There's a lot to think about when you're designing like this, but the quality of the space is hugely improved.
Yeah, I'll probably use that. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sorry, I'm quite loud anyway, so if the mic gets a bit much, let me know. So I'm Sarah Tilbury. I work at Interface, and I am a concept designer, so I have the lovely job of guiding people through their designs and talking to them about our products, because we have over 120 different product ranges across our carpet tile, Nora rubber and LVT. So we're fully aware it becomes slightly overwhelming to know where to start and how to design with it. So it's my job to help guide and assist people. But in terms of interface, we are now a carbon neutral enterprise. So all of our products are carbon neutral. We even have some products that are carbon negative, which we are very proud of. But in terms of, so obviously sustainability is kind of ingrained in everything we do as a company. It's in our company ethos. But certainly as well in terms of design and as a concept designer, we are constantly being asked to assist with well-being is at the forefront of what everyone wants to design with, and so we're huge advocates of biophilic design, and it's in our kind of day-to-day that we do. So we have worked as a company with Oliver Heath Designs, who you may or may not be aware of, but he is a specialist in terms of biophilic design. And we've worked with him to put together these white papers or research-based papers, and I think you've all got one on your chair. It's a bit of a lucky dip as to which one you ended up with. But we've got two, so we've got one on biophilic design and we've got one on cognitive and sensory well-being. And interestingly, the biophilic design one it touches a lot on the 15 patterns that Emma mentioned earlier. So that's the nature in the space, the nature, the natural analogues, and the nature of the space. And certainly at Interface, we use a lot of natural analogues. So we'll use materials that mimic nature, or we'll integrate that into our kind of non-living materials that mimic natural materials. But we also use a lot of nature of the space as well. So that's something that is really kind of strong for us. And I know Emma talked about it earlier, but it's about kind of designing spaces that people can retreat to. So if you want refuge, you have those spaces. Also things like prospect, so views across the space, which help with wayfinding, also helps to see, it's kind of inbuilt in our psyche that we like to have that view out onto nature, or even in our built environments, because it makes us feel safe within our spaces. And I think what's interesting, I'm actually going to talk about the cognitive and sensory wellbeing guide, because I think it's kind of taken some of these spatial principles within the biophilic design guide, and it's kind of taken that a step further. And so within that, if you've got one of those guides, you will have what we've kind of, on page 42, there's almost like a framework. And we have spares, so don't fight over them. We can make sure you get one afterwards. But what's nice about that is within this framework, it looks at these different sensory thresholds. So you've got low, medium, and high sensory threshold. But it's also looked at different sensory stimuli within that. So you've got visual, acoustic, and tactility, and it's kind of it's a very easy guide as to how you can start to design some of those principles into any interior space. So that's kind of a very how-to guide. But within concept design, we've actually taken that a step further as well. So we have put together what we've kind of deemed an application guide, and we've actually we've made it specialist and aimed at education spaces. So we've kind of kept education in mind, and we've taken each of those different sensory thresholds. So I'll go through each and explain what those are. So low sensory thresholds, these are spaces for people who might be kind of overstimulated quite easily. So these are spaces where you want to have kind of little to no noise. You wouldn't want kind of overwhelming sense within the space. And I think location with these are key. So you want to have those ideally located away from walkways or entrances, basically spaces where you're going to kind of have these kind of busier, loud environments. But also what's key with those, with the low sensory spaces, is colours and texture. So what we've done within concept design is we've put together colour palettes that we feel would be suitable to find within these kind of low sensory thresholds. And so you're looking at really kind of muted colours, you've got organic textures, and what we're starting to see is this more kind of sophisticated approach to biophilic design. So I think we've all kind of said it, but it's not just about applying plants to a space. It's it's much less literal than that. And we've, I think even within our own products, we've kind of evolved and we've adapted. So, initially we had products that directly kind of copied nature, whereas we've seen this real kind of toning down of colour, and so these much softer greens, but also not just greens as well. So looking at other natural landscapes, as well. So we've got products that mimic desert, for example, or salt water, or fresh water, or rainforest. So we're looking at all these other spaces that you might see in nature. It's not just the greens that we've kind of potentially seen before. And then we've taken that a step further as well. So we've picked out kind of key areas within an education space. So we've got learning spaces, we've got living spaces, and even social spaces. And this is an example of a social space. But what we've done is we've actually tried to show you that even within a social space, you can still design for low sensory thresholds. So by using flooring, you can kind of create zones on the floor and kind of what we would call soft boundaries. So you don't have to put in these hard partitions to divide these spaces off for these people who need these low sensory spaces. You can do that by zoning on the floor and as we've done here, kind of creating small pockets of furniture so that people know if they want to have individual time or quieter focus time, they're instantly drawn to those spaces. Whereas by putting big banks of table in the middle, people instantly know that if you want to socialise in a larger group, that's where you would go. And so it seems fairly straightforward, but just by doing these really simple things, you can kind of create spaces, different spaces within one space that allow for different people's needs. And so we've done this with flooring, where we can kind of transition across the floor and play around with texture. And so we've given different examples of how we can kind of do that and zone across the floor with our products, and how you would do that in these different education settings as well. Then we move on to medium sensory thresholds, and here you would start to kind of expect the conversation to pick up a little. So you're looking at potentially meeting rooms where you would meet in kind of smaller groups and start to socialise, and you'd have some more background noise, you'd have more kind of harmonious colours coming through. So again, we've done exactly the same thing where we've picked out these colour palettes, but you'll start to see kind of stronger colours coming through in this, and texture and pattern being integrated. And these are spaces where there's no need for total privacy anymore. So you're encouraging more socialization and more coming together. So with that, you can kind of, as I say, start to pick up pattern and be more visual. And certainly with flooring, what's really nice is we can almost kind of give a nod back to nature. So quite often at Interface, we'll play around with texture underfoot as well, because you can imagine if you walked through a rainforest or any kind of natural environment, you would experience different textures underfoot. So again, that's a really simple way of kind of giving a nod back to biophilic design. But again, in terms of installation, we can start to be much more experimental. You'll start to see colour coming through much stronger. And we can kind of play, as I said, we can play around with textures. So we've got hard and soft flooring, but certainly with our LVT and our carpet tile, the backing height is exactly the same. So there's no need for transition strips. So you can kind of play around with texture quite easily underfoot. So again, example spaces of how you can design and the things that you can do across the floor. Oh, sorry. How do I go? Oh, there we go. Perfect. And then finally, we have the high sensory thresholds. So I'm sure you've kind of got the gist of it by now, but You know, these are spaces that we would expect to see people who kind of thrive off social interaction or want to be around others, and these are the kind of environments where they need to be around people. And so you would expect the conversation level to rise. You would expect to see much more colour, and we can be much more experimental with colour and design here. So here we've put in some of our products that are much more outspoken, and certainly with modular flooring, you know, it doesn't have to be one specific product. We can play around with design and colour on the floor, and then just, you know, having these much more vibrant colours coming through that are energising and pick up the energy within the space. So yeah, you can see here again how we would design with modular flooring, and we're just giving examples again of how you can zone on the floor and pick out these different spaces within one space. And even just simple cuts and playing around, you can do some really kind of interesting things with modular flooring and how we would design with it. But the idea is that obviously we would kind of like, I mean, I know it's not possible in every design environment, but the idea is that you would design all three into every space, because as with, you know, any kind of individual, we all have different needs. You know, just because you're an introvert doesn't mean you want to sit in silence all day. Just because you're an extrovert doesn't mean you want to be surrounded by people all day. So, you know, we need to kind of start thinking about how we can design that flexibility into one space. And that's what this kind of framework has been designed to do. So we have the research papers that show you why that's so important, but then we've also put this application guide together as well to kind of show you exactly how we would see that being done with our products on the floor. And so ideally we can kind of encourage people to start to design these spaces into any of their spaces and allow for those individual needs of the user, and in turn improve our well-being and our focus and just make people more productive and creative within their spaces. Yes, so thank you.